Those tests had no medical purpose at all.
Every test had a standing doctor's order.
An order you paid him a monthly fee to sign.
This is Kenneth Bailynson. He ran a sober home in West Palm Beach for years, and not one person checked what he was actually doing to the recovering addicts sleeping under his roof. Today, that changes.
Every requisition was authorized and on file.
Paper does not make it medical, Curtis.
He would not get the chance to explain to investigators what kind of business he had really been running. Within 72 hours, federal agents from 3 different agencies would walk into Good Decision Sober Living with subpoenas, freeze the bank accounts, and start interviewing the recovering addicts who slept in his bedrooms. 81 insurance companies, $110 million in fraudulent claims, $31 million in restitution, and every dollar of it built on the bodies of people trying to stay sober. Before we go any further, I have to ask you something. If you found out that the place you trusted to keep your son or daughter sober was actually running a billing scheme on top of their recovery, what would you do? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe right now. This channel covers the cases mainstream news will not touch, and the Florida sober home industry has hundreds of them. Kenneth Bailynson was born in 1976 in Hempstead, Long Island, the second of 3 children in a middle-class family. His father was a regional sales manager for a wholesale electrical supply company, the kind of job that paid for a split-level house and 2 cars and not much else. His mother worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a dental practice in Garden City. Money was not tight in the Bailynson home, but it was watched. Receipts were saved in a kitchen drawer. Coupons were clipped on Sunday mornings. Vacations meant a week at a rented cottage in the Poconos, never a hotel. He was an average student through middle school, with teachers describing him in report cards as personable and quick to find a deal, language that flattered him in retrospect more than it did at the time. He played some baseball, never well enough for varsity. He worked summers from the age of 15 forward, first bagging groceries at a Pathmark on Hempstead Turnpike, then by 16 at a marina down on the Great South Bay, scrubbing holes and selling bait. The marina was his first lesson in how money actually moved: cash for fuel, cash for slip rentals, cash tips for helping wealthy weekenders dock their boats. He learned the difference between people who earned money and people who simply had it. He decided he wanted to be the second kind. He graduated from Hempstead High School in 1994 with a 2.8 grade point average and a half-formed plan to go into business. He spent 2 years at Nassau Community College taking marketing courses, then dropped out without a degree when a family friend offered him a sales job with a Florida real estate broker. He moved to West Palm Beach in October of 1997 with $1,800 in his checking account and a duffel bag in the trunk of a 1989 Honda Accord. Florida in the late 90s was already overheating. Bailynson got his real estate license in 1998 and learned quickly that the easy money was not in selling houses. The easy money was in adjacent industries that fed off the housing boom. He bounced through 3 brokerages between 1998 and 2003. Co-workers from that period remembered him as charming and competent, but always looking for the next angle. One former office manager would later tell investigators that Kenneth never finished a sentence about a deal without working out who else could be paid on it. In 2004, he married Lauren Mendoza, a hospital administrator he had met at a Boca Raton Chamber of Commerce mixer. They bought a 4-bedroom house in suburban West Palm Beach with a screened pool, took a honeymoon in Cabo San Lucas, and had their first child in 2006. By outward appearance, the Baylynsons were a successful South Florida couple. Lauren handled the family finances. Kenneth handled the business. The 2 ledgers did not always match. The 2008 housing crash wiped out his real estate income almost overnight. He sold his second car. He cashed in a small retirement account. For nearly 2 years, he worked commission jobs that paid him in promises, including a stint at a mortgage modification company that was later shut down by the Florida Attorney General. He never faced personal charges from that stint, but he came out of it with 3 pieces of knowledge that would shape the rest of his life. He understood how to set up an LLC quickly. He understood that insurance companies and federal benefit programs paid claims first, and asked questions much later. And he understood that desperate people would sign almost any paperwork put in front of them if the alternative was nothing. By 2011, the Florida recovery industry was beginning its first major boom. The Affordable Care Act was about to take effect. Private insurers were being required to cover substance use treatment at parity with physical health care. Sober homes, which had operated for decades as low-margin residential operations, were suddenly attached to a billing pipeline that could generate thousands of dollars per resident per week through associated lab work and intensive outpatient programs. Kenneth Bailynson had no clinical background. He had no degree in counseling. He had no certification in addiction medicine. What he had was a real estate license, an LLC, and a willingness to learn the codes. He opened Good Decisions Sober Living in the spring of 2012 in a 2-story stucco house on a quiet residential street off Belvedere Road in West Palm Beach. The marketing materials promised a structured, drug-free environment, professionally supervised, with comprehensive medical oversight. The reality, from the first month forward, was something else entirely. To understand what Kenneth Bailynson did, you have to understand how the Florida recovery industry actually worked between 2012 and 2018. It was a chain of 3 legally separate but financially intertwined entities: sober home, treatment center, clinical laboratory. Each one billed insurance for a different service. Each one could pay the others for referrals, as long as the paperwork was structured carefully enough to hide what the payments were really for. A sober home in the traditional sense was just supervised housing. Residents paid rent. They submitted to occasional drug testing, usually once a week, to confirm they were staying sober. They attended outside 12-step meetings or intensive outpatient programs at separate clinical facilities. Insurance was never billed by the sober home itself. Sober homes were licensed under residential statutes, not medical ones, and Florida's regulatory oversight in 2012 was almost non-existent. A man with no clinical training could open one. Kenneth Bailynson did. The treatment center was a different animal. Treatment centers were licensed clinical facilities that billed insurance for intensive outpatient programs, partial hospitalization, group therapy, individual counseling. Reimbursement rates ran from a few hundred to several $1,000s per resident per week. Treatment centers needed patients. Sober homes had beds full of them. The third piece was the clinical lab. Federal and private insurance both paid for urinalysis drug screens, and they paid generously. A simple confirmation test could be billed at anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 to a private insurer in 2014. A panel of screens, run weekly across a house of 20 residents, was a recurring revenue stream that could run into 6 figures per month, per house. The labs needed urine. The sober homes had bathrooms. The anti-kickback statute, codified at 42 U.S.C. Section 1320A-7B, forbade paying anything of value in exchange for referring patients to a federal health benefit program. The Eliminating Kickbacks in Recovery Act, passed in 2018, would later extend similar prohibitions to private insurance. But in the years Kenneth Bailynson was building Good Decisions Sober Living, the private pay side of the equation existed in a gray zone, and enforcement was thin. 81 private insurers, most of them out of state, were processing claims from Florida facilities they could not physically inspect. They trusted the paperwork. The paperwork said the testing was medically necessary. The paperwork was signed by a physician. That physician was Dr. Mark Agresti, a West Palm Beach psychiatrist with a real medical license, real privileges, and a real waiting room. Agresti provided what the industry called standing orders for urine drug testing. A single signed order, renewed monthly, authorized a facility to test a resident as often as the facility chose to. Agresti was paid a flat monthly fee per sober home he covered. He never met most of the residents whose tests he authorized. He rarely reviewed the results. His signature was the medical veneer that turned a billing engine into a treatment program on paper. That structure, built piece by piece across 3 years, was what Kenneth Bailynson sat at the center of by 2015. He was not a doctor. He was not a counselor. He was a landlord, and his rent was paid in urine. The first incident on the federal indictment was dated October 14, 2014. A 26-year-old man named Jacob Riley, 3 weeks sober from a heroin addiction, signed a residency agreement with Good Decisions Sober Living. The agreement was 4 pages long. On page 3, paragraph 11, there was a clause titled Medical Compliance Requirement. It stated that as a condition of continued residency, the resident agreed to submit to drug screening services as ordered by the facility's medical director, at a frequency to be determined by clinical staff. Jacob Riley initialed the clause. He did not understand what it meant. He thought it meant a urine test once a week, the way every sober home he had heard of operated. By his second week at Good Decisions, Jacob Riley was peeing in a cup 3 times. By his 4th week, 4 times. The collection cart rolled through the house on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, with an additional random test on either Saturday or Sunday. The cups went into a small, unmarked van and were driven to a lab in Lake Worth that was, on paper, an independent contractor, and in practice owned by an LLC that listed Kenneth Bailynson as its registered agent. Each cup generated a billing claim. Each claim generated a payment from Jacob Riley's insurance carrier. Jacob Riley never saw a single one of those bills. They went to his mother's address in Hartford, Connecticut, and they were paid by an Aetna plan provided through her employer. The method was clinical, in the worst sense of the word. Residents were classified by insurance carrier on the day they moved in. The carriers that paid the highest reimbursement rates for urinalysis confirmation testing were Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield of various states, and a federal employee benefit plan administered through the Department of Labor. Residents covered by those plans were tested most frequently. Residents on Medicaid, which paid lower rates and audited more aggressively, were tested less often, or sometimes not at all. The decision was not clinical, it was actuarial. The escalation between 2014 and 2017 was relentless. Good Decisions, Sober Living, expanded from 1 house to 4, then to 7, then to 9 houses across West Palm Beach, and the surrounding municipalities of Lake Worth, Riviera Beach, and Green Acres. Each house held between 8 and 16 residents at any given time. At peak operation, Kenneth Bailynson controlled housing for approximately 120 recovering addicts, every one of them generating between 2 and 4 billable urine specimens per week. The lab's monthly revenue from Good Decisions residents alone, by the middle of 2016, exceeded $900,000. To keep the houses full, Bailynson needed a referral pipeline. That pipeline was built by 2 co-conspirators. Stephanie Curran, a 32-year-old marketing consultant with prior experience at a Boca Raton treatment center, ran outside recruitment. Matthew Noel, a former counselor who had surrendered his license over an ethics complaint years earlier, worked the inside angle. He paid cash bribes to admission staff at competing sober homes, including the treatment center of the Palm Beaches and a facility called Last Stop, to redirect their incoming residents to Good Decisions. The going rate, according to text messages later recovered by federal investigators, was $500 per head for a Cigna patient, $300 for Aetna, $200 for Blue Cross. The signs were everywhere if anyone had been looking. Residents complained to family members about the constant testing. Some left after 2 weeks, unable to tolerate being treated as specimen sources. A handful of staff counselors, hired briefly and let go quickly when they pushed back on the testing frequency, filed complaints with the Florida Department of Children and Families. Those complaints went into a queue. The queue moved slowly. Bailynson knew. He knew about every complaint. He kept a folder. He referred to it in one recovered email as his weather report. Lauren Bailynson, his wife, would later tell investigators that she had asked him, repeatedly, why the lab was generating so much money for so little visible work. She had a hospital administration background. The numbers did not add up to anything she had seen in legitimate clinical billing. He told her the lab had high-volume contracts and that she should focus on the children. She stopped asking. She did not stop noticing. By 2017, the Baylynsons owned the 4-bedroom house outright, a second home in the Florida Keys, a 2016 Range Rover Sport, a 2015 Mercedes E-Class, and a 38-foot Sea Ray Sundancer docked at Riviera Beach. He knew the houses were not sober. He knew the testing was not clinical. He knew the residents were assets, and he kept opening more houses. We are about to get into the part where the federal government finally walks through the door. Before we do, leave a comment with the city you are watching from, and if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment. We cover medical fraud and sober home fraud cases every single week, and these stories do not get the coverage they deserve. The catalyst was a death. On the morning of February 9, 2017, a 23-year-old Good Decisions resident named Tyler Hendricks was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of the Belvedere Roadhouse at 6:42 a.m. Paramedics from Palm Beach County Fire Rescue arrived within 9 minutes. They administered 2 doses of naloxone. Tyler Hendricks did not respond. He was pronounced dead at JFK Medical Center in Atlantis, Florida, at 7:31 a.m. The cause of death, according to the medical examiner's report filed 3 weeks later, was acute fentanyl intoxication. Tyler Hendricks had been at Good Decisions for 19 days. During those 19 days, he had been billed for 11 separate urinalysis drug screens. The last screen, collected 6 days before his death, had come back positive for opioids. Nothing happened. There was no clinical intervention. There was no notification to his family. There was no removal from the residence. The positive result was noted in the lab's records, filed and billed to his insurer. Tyler Hendricks remained in the house, unsupervised at night, with active opioid use unaddressed, until he overdosed and died on a bathroom floor. His mother, Curran Hendricks, lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. She had paid for her son's placement at Good Decisions herself, out of her own savings, on the recommendation of a treatment consultant she had hired. After the funeral, she requested her son's medical records. She received 11 urinalysis bills. She did not receive any clinical notes, any counseling records, any documentation of treatment of any kind. She called Good Decisions. She called the lab. She called Dr. Mark Agresti's office. She got nowhere. Curran Hendricks was a litigation paralegal at a Manhattan law firm. She knew how to build a record. She filed a formal complaint with her son's insurance carrier, Cigna, alleging billing fraud and clinical negligence. The complaint landed in front of an in-house investigator who had been quietly building a file on Florida sober home billing patterns for almost a year. Cigna's data analytics team had already flagged Good Decisions Sober Living and the affiliated lab as statistical outliers, generating roughly 6 times the per-resident testing volume of comparable Florida facilities. The complaint provided the human story the analysts had been waiting for. Within 30 days, Cigna had referred the file to the FBI's West Palm Beach resident agency, the Department of Labor's Employee Benefit Security Administration, and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The federal investigation that followed would last almost 3 years. The investigation was unglamorous and methodical. Agents did not raid the houses in the first months. They subpoenaed records. They pulled billing data from 81 separate insurance carriers. They built a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet, when finished, ran to 17,000 rows. Each row was a single urinalysis claim submitted by Good Decisions, or its affiliated lab, between January of 2013 and December of 2018. The total billed value of those rows was $109,412,000. The total paid value, after insurer adjustments, was approximately $58 million. A cooperator entered the case in late 2017. Matthew Noel, the inside recruiter, had been questioned by FBI agents during a routine canvass of former Good Decisions staff. He had not been the primary target. He had volunteered. Through his attorney, he agreed to record conversations with both Bailynson and Curran. Over the next 8 months, he produced approximately 140 hours of audio. Bailynson, on those recordings, was specific. He talked about which insurers paid the best. He talked about residents as inventory. In one recorded conversation from March of 2018, he told Noel, and the words were later quoted verbatim in the indictment, that we do not make money keeping them sober. We make money keeping them in the cup. The text messages were worse. investigators recovered the contents of 3 separate iPhones during search warrants executed in August of 2018. The exchanges between Bailynson and Curran read like a transcript of a business that had forgotten its own subject matter. Bailynson, June 11, 2016. How many beds open at Belvedere? Curran, June 11, 2016. 4. 2 Cigna, 1 Aetna, 1 self-pay. Bailynson, June 11, 2016. Do not take the self-pay. Hold the bed. Curran, August 3, 2016. Last stop has 6 coming out next week. What is the rate? Bailynson, August 3, 2016. 5 for Cigna, 3 for Aetna, same as before. Do not promise anything until we see cards. Curran, January 14, 2017. Tyler H. is hot again. Lab confirmed. Bailynson, January 14, 2017. Billet. Do not move him. That last exchange, dated approximately 4 weeks before Tyler Hendricks died on the bathroom floor of the Belvedere Roadhouse, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The defense would later argue it was misinterpreted, that hot referred to a heating problem in the room and not to a positive drug screen. The jury, when shown the lab record from the same date, would not accept the argument. The physical evidence accumulated during the August 2018 search warrants was extensive. Agents seized financial records showing approximately $7 million in payments from the affiliated lab to Bailenson's personal LLCs over 5 years. They seized the standing order documents from Dr. Mark Agresti's office, each one a single page, each one authorizing testing as clinically indicated, 3 to 4 times weekly, for residents Agresti had never personally examined. They seized a black and white composition notebook from Bailenson's home office, kept in a desk drawer, with handwritten figures tracking monthly revenue per house, monthly testing volume, and monthly payments to Curran and Noel. The notebook became Exhibit 47. The arrest came on the morning of December 4th, 2019. Kenneth Bailynson was at home in the kitchen of his West Palm Beach house, brewing a single cup of coffee through a Keurig machine. His wife and 2 children were still upstairs. At 6:14 a.m., a team of FBI agents, accompanied by an IRS criminal investigation special agent and 2 Department of Labor investigators, knocked on the front door with a federal arrest warrant and a sealed indictment. He opened the door in a gray t-shirt and navy athletic shorts. The lead agent, a 15-year veteran of the Bureau's healthcare fraud unit, identified himself in the body cam footage as Special Agent David Crowley. The exchange, captured by Crowley's chest camera, was brief. Special Agent Crowley. Kenneth Bailynson? Bailynson. Yes, Crowley. We have a federal arrest warrant for you. Sir, you need to step outside. Bailynson. Can I get my wife? Can I tell her what is going on? Crowley. No, sir. Other agents are going to speak with her in a moment. You need to come with me right now. Turn around, hands behind your back. Bailynson. I want to understand what this is about. Crowley. It is about good decisions, sober living, sir. You are being charged with healthcare fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and violations of the anti-kickback statute. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Bailenson's body went still on the porch. The footage shows his shoulders drop. He looked back into the house, where the agents were already moving up the staircase to speak with his wife. He did not ask for a lawyer in that moment. He said one thing, almost to himself, that the body cam captured cleanly enough to be admitted as evidence at his sentencing hearing 2.5 years later. Bailynson. She kept telling me to stop. He was handcuffed at 6:17 a.m., walked to an unmarked Chevrolet Tahoe parked at the curb, and transported to the Palm Beach County Jail for federal processing. He was arraigned the following morning in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida. Bail was set at $500,000, secured by the equity in the West Palm Beach house. He was released pending trial that afternoon. The federal indictment was unsealed on December 4, 2019, the morning of the arrest. It charged Kenneth Bailynson with 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1349, 23 substantive counts of healthcare fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1347, 6 counts of money laundering under 18 U.S.C. Section 1956, and 1 count of conspiracy to violate the anti-kickback statute. The indictment named 4 co-defendants. Stephanie Curran and Matthew Noel pled guilty in the early months of 2020. Dr. Mark Agresti, the medical director, fought the charges for 19 months before agreeing to a plea in late 2021. Baylynson's defense attorney, a Miami federal practitioner named Stephen Galletti, argued through pretrial motions that the standing order framework was a legitimate medical structure used widely throughout the Florida recovery industry. He filed motions to suppress the recorded conversations on entrapment grounds. The motions were denied. He filed motions to exclude the composition notebook, Exhibit 47, on chain of custody grounds. The motions were denied. By November of 2021, the defense had run out of pretrial arguments, and Bailynson agreed to enter a guilty plea on the lead conspiracy count and 3 substantive fraud counts in exchange for the dismissal of the remaining charges. The sentencing hearing was held on April 20th, 2022, in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida, before United States District Judge Marcia Rosenfield. The hearing lasted just over 3 hours. The government called 2 victim witnesses. The first was a former Good Decisions resident named Megan Forrester, who had relapsed and nearly died after being discharged when her insurance carrier finally pushed back on the testing frequency. The second was Karen Hendricks, Tyler Hendricks' mother. Karen Hendricks read her victim impact statement standing at the lectern, holding a single sheet of paper. She did not cry. She read for 11 minutes. She described her son at 15, at 20, at 22. She described the morning she received the phone call from JFK Medical Center. She described receiving 11 urinalysis bills in the mail and no clinical notes. She told the court, and her words appeared in 3 different newspapers the following week, that my son was billed 11 times and treated 0 times, and the man who built that system is sitting at the table behind me. Judge Rosenfield's sentencing remarks ran for nearly 15 minutes. She addressed the defendant directly. She noted that Kenneth Bailynson had no clinical training, no medical authority, and no professional obligation to anyone in his care, and that he had nonetheless built a residential system that converted recovering addicts into a recurring billing instrument. She noted that he had continued the scheme after a resident died in one of his houses. She noted that his own wife had warned him to stop, and that he had not. She imposed a sentence of 72 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and restitution in the amount of $31,041,938 to be distributed among the 81 insurance carriers identified in the indictment. Dr. Mark Agresti received 100 months. Stephanie Curran received 12 months and a day. Matthew Noel, who had cooperated, received 14 months. Kenneth Bailynson reported to FCI Miami, a low-security federal facility in southeastern Florida, on June 14, 2022. He is scheduled for release in 2027. Lauren Bailynson filed for divorce 6 months after his arrival at the facility. The West Palm Beach house was sold to satisfy a portion of the restitution order. The Sea Ray Sundancer was auctioned through a U.S. Marshals Service sale. The Florida Keys property was forfeited to the federal government. Good Decisions. Sober Living, as a business entity, was dissolved on December 19, 2019. The 9 houses were sold individually over the following 18 months. None of them operate as sober homes today. The lab in Lake Worth was shut down on the morning of the arrest and never reopened. The broker Stephanie Curran had cultivated at the treatment center of the Palm Beaches and Last Stop both lost their licenses. The Florida Department of Children and Families issued new regulatory guidance on sober home oversight in the spring of 2023, citing the Good Decisions case by name. Tyler Hendricks is buried in a small cemetery in Greenwich, Connecticut. His mother visits on the 2nd Sunday of every month. That case was hard to sit with, but the one on the right-hand side of your screen is the one I still cannot stop thinking about. Click it now.